Ani bonjour, and welcome to Anishinaabe Word Cards. Join myself, Rochelle, and Dené while we work on improving our understanding of an important aspect of Anishinaabe and discuss our experiences as Anishinaabe learners, users, and teachers.
This is a learning journey, a starting place for further exploration. Do not mistake our enthusiasm for any kind of authority. We have learned from amazing speakers, but we make mistakes and misunderstand things.
Always check in with speakers and learners in your area to find the words and word parts that work best for you. Nahau, Bajtada. Ani Kinawia, Rochelle and Dené, Toronto in Dada, Wabshishi in Dodem, Nos Neashingaming de Ben Dagaze. Hi everyone, my name's Rochelle. I live here in Toronto. I'm part of the Martin clan, and my father is a member of Nawash, Cape Croker, and I am here as one of your hosts for Anishinaabe Word Parts, where we talk about the various parts that make up Anishinaabe verbs, words, and other things. And I am here with my friend Dené. Dené, how are you doing today?
Nechikandam. Nin bindege gijugo kwen dishinekanago, gigon ndodem, asho wananing and donji, mi oma, ga okote, ishdayon mego. So that's Winnipeg. And my name's Dené. I'm from the Fish Clan, and I'm from a place called Selkirk, Manitoba, and I live here in Winnipeg. And I'm really happy. We took a little break from recording, so it's really nice to get back in the podcast chair and talk about these next few episodes.
Yeah, and another new milestone for us, we are about to listen to our first interview. We were lucky enough to sit down with Alan Corbiere. Alan O.G. Corbiere is from the Bene Dodem. He is Anishinaabe from Chiging. He is a language learner and also an assistant professor in the history department at York University. He talks a little bit about some of the word parts and even preverbs, which when I was starting out, when I was thinking this, I really was thinking specifically initials, medials, and finals. But preverbs come before the initial. And I think he makes some really good points about how learners sort of hear them first and how important they are in the language. So I think we might have to open up our future and include things like preverbs and that as we go along.
Yeah, it's interesting talking with some of my speakers and some of the resources that we studied and how speakers understand these word parts too. And a lot of times I'll just see them. I'll see Rick Rachik has this really great series of books. We've talked about them before, and they have this list in their books. Jim Clark makes these lists of words, and they're all just called prefixes. I think that's really interesting because, in my head, I think about, well, prefix, and some of them are preverbs and some of them are initials. And I know that now, right? There was a point when I first saw these lists, I didn't really know what I was looking at. It just was all prefixes, right? All the beginning parts of words or things that you hear around and connected to the beginning of some of these verb actions. And so that's what I was really thinking about when Alan is about to talk about this idea of preverbs and just how the words start. And so I think I'm in this journey of currently trying to dismantle, well, what's a preverb and what's an initial and what's the difference and when do I use one over the other? When really it's important, I think, to understand this is all that stuff at the beginning. And we have to learn the grammatical rules so that we use them properly. But when you have that inherent knowledge of the language, it's just the part at the beginning. And so we try not to get too in our heads about some of this stuff, but sometimes it's easy to go down a rabbit hole as learners.
Absolutely. So, with that, here is the first part of our interview with Alan Corbiere. We're very grateful today to have a guest with us, Alan Corbiere, who has been doing incredible language and history work for quite a while. And we wanted to pick his brain a little bit today about this whole way that Anishinaabe has little parts that contain meaning and how they can be moved around to express things more fully or to um, bring in more feeling to different things we discuss. So we're really grateful that he was willing to come in and chat with us. And Alan, thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem.
So, one thing we were curious about, because part of this podcast is trying to expose people to the idea of morphemes or word parts and that system that exists in our language. How do you talk about that with people? Have you ever tried to discuss it with new learners?
I have, and I guess at first what a lot of people are used to is these aren't morphemes, though. They're preverbs or adverbs like kache and be and ne and beme. These are the words that you put in front of a verb, and in the case of kache, a noun, but it works for both. Uh, Kache works for both nouns and verbs, but I those are just some of the parts that you end up talking about for to get students to start thinking about directionality and how a simple little which would be could be a phoneme, but it's actually a preverb be and ne, but of course out west they would say ende. But here's how I usually tell people I learned. Well, I already knew it, but how this can just that little word can throw you off, or that little preverb can throw you off. So my late buddy, he was an elder here in the community, and he could, of course, he was fluent, and he would phone me up sometimes. He didn't have a car, so he was always bumming a ride. And so where I live, where I was working was at Lakeview School, and that's away from the water, from the we're an island, Manitoulin Island, and Chigging. Uh, the north side of the reserve faces the North Channel of Lake Huron, so that's the big water. And then when you go inland, there's another couple of little lakes. One's a smaller lake, but the other one is called Mindamoya Lake, which is, of course, is the anglicization of Mindimwe, old lady. Anyway, we're closer to that. And so when I was a kid, my aunt lived up in Lakeview. They call it Lakeview in English. But we would always my parents or my grandparents would I remember them always saying, "Nope, me," that we're going in the country, and then or if we're going up further up, "Nope, me," they'd always say. So some say "Nope, me," and over here some say "Nok me." So it's the same thing, but it means going inland, in the country, hinterland. Some say translated as. Anyway, my buddy he lives up in Lakeview there at the time, and so I'm at Lakeview, and then but down in the village by the big water, Lake Huron, is the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. So he would do a lot of work down there as well. So he says he phones me up one day and he says he's down in at the OCF and he says, "Kui bim da bina," and I was like, "Bim da bi." He says, "Oh yeah." I says, "So if you just say Madabi, that means you're coming down to the lakeshore." So then when he says "Kui bim da bi," are you coming down to the lakeshore? With a bit more specificity. Anyway, so as I was like, oh, okay, I got it. And then the one that threw me though is when we were down there. Then later on, he says, "Queen Nick Pina, Queen Nick P," and I was like, "Go P, I know that word. Go P, Nick P. What's Nick P?" And then before I was too slow, he says, "Are you going? Don't bring na Gadeja. Are you going up the country?" And I was like, "Oh, that's it, Nick P. You're going up and away from the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, from the village. You're going away." And then so another time, I'm actually down in the village. Calls me up and he says, "Kui big pina." And then by this time, though, I knew I was like, "Okay, I know what he's saying." But before, if he had just said "Kui pina," I would have got him. But when he just put that qui nick p ne, that threw me off, and bit that threw me off. So just that directionality is what threw me off there, and it's just a little. Of course, it's just a little word, and or I should say a preverb, and that's what threw me off. Directional. little directional thing. And then the other thing that's interesting to me is when we talk about history, the word history, some people will say, "Me manda ga be Israel bak ma be medominisi," and then others will say, "We ne joe bak ma be medominisi." So then, and then Ejwe bak, of course, it just means it happens, whatever has happened. Eh? But when they're saying, some say Kabe Ejwe bak, that means that's what had come to pass here on the island. Whereas I often thought, wouldn't it be Nejwe bak? So sometimes what I think needs to be studied a bit more is this ne, be, and bime, on how this it's all about process and direction as well. And one of the things that's I find interesting, like my dad come over and he's talking away to me, and then he just says that same thing. Wow, ngabme jichige, gego dashin ngabme jichige. And it's just I was just like, oh, he's just saying, well, I guess I'll continue on going about going along doing something, is what he was saying. And then so those things, like sometimes I get them mixed up, and I heard a friend of ours talk about this too, like especially when you say me we gi nick kendan, me we nick kendama, or ga big kendama, ga nick kendama, ga big kendama. And it's like so she was like, I thought I was saying it right, like when somebody was saying, do you know this, or did you learn this? And so she says, gi big kendama. They said, oh. So they corrected her, whatever one it was. I forget if it was be or ne that she said, but it was actually the opposite. So the speakers actually have a different, especially with process, not like not actual physical direction going somewhere, but especially if you learn something, something that we would call intangible or abstract. If you learned something like kendan, if you knew something, come to know something, if you use that be and ne, that makes a difference in which one you're going to say. And it's interesting to talk to speakers about that, because they'll use it different ways, eh? And as well as that bime. So, but what that earlier example I was saying with gopi, that's about going away from a location or coming to a location. So those ones are easier to figure out. But when it's about your state, and then it's actually a bit more difficult to sort out when you're talking to fluent speakers that's their first language, and they'll use these little things more adeptly, and sometimes a bit differently than us learners do, I find, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked about this a couple times, but we feel like we learn something, right? You learn be and ne, but then the more you go on, the more nuance and the more sort of complex the story becomes. And so it's important for people to keep trying to improve because, yeah, you might have it in the physical sense, but there's still work to be done.
I remember Rochelle and I were in this class and we had this big group discussion about, in English, we say these weird things in English, right? Like, I'm going to take you to the airport, or am I going to bring you to the airport, or am I going to take you flowers, or am I going to bring you flowers? And all these really interesting English ideas of bringing and taking and kind of going along and doing these things. And it really messes up us when we try to think Anishinaabe and try to be like, well, how do I translate this thought of, okay, I'm going to pick up Rochelle and I'm going to take her to the store, but I'm actually in Anishinaabe, you're actually bime, like you're bringing her along. So I'm wondering if you think that bime as a preverb is different than the morpheme version.
It just behaves differently, but I don't think meaning wise, I don't think it does. And one of the interesting things that I learned long ago, I guess this will be take a bit of a detour in what we're talking about, but years ago I learned from one of the teachers in Toronto. His name was Alec McKay, but he passed away now. And he did a thing about this, and I was just enthralled with this. I just thought it was awesome. Anyway, he wrote on the board "Bedobbin," the word for approaching dawn, but people say it means dawn, but it actually means approaching dawn. And that's where we're getting mixed up because we use that for dawn now. Eh? But there's a old religious newsletter called Peep of Day. Anyway, that's actually more what it would be. Anyway, so he ended up writing on the board Bedobbin, and then he put a slash between the BII and then cut a slash down, and then DAA, and then he cut a slash down, and he put BAN. So he had it into 3 syllables, which would be B, and then da, and then bun. And he says, this is the perfect word for dawn. He says, because B means it's coming, da means where you are, and bun is the past tense. And that's what B Dobbin is, the exact point of day that is the past, where you're at, and then what the future is going to be the next day. And I was just like, holy, that blew my mind because I was thinking B and then da and then bun. But I didn't know that the actual morpheme was bead, approaching. So, and like be dasage, all these, So I don't know if he knew that. Anyway, so that's what really got me into, one of the things that got me looking into morphology. But then the other one was bimadaze, to get back into bime. And then so people, were translating this, and then of course now we have people thinking that odze, around here anyway, people act like odze is a word. Odzewin, they end up saying, well, we're going to have an Odzewin class. And it's like, that's not a word. Anyway, it would be in Nodzuin or Nodzuin if they're doing that. And that's, of course, how somebody's character is in that. And then, so Bimodzuin, of course, Bime, going along, and that Odze. That's how I understood it, that word Bime. But then you just take out that short I after the M, and then it makes a whole word. Anyway, that's what that to mean life as you're going along, your character as you're going along, that going along, living your life on this on earth. And then bimodegze is the other one. Bimodegze, when you're moving, and it means like a migration. Bimodegze wak Anishinaabe. Gi bimodegze wak Anishinaabe. They moved, and they moved along. Anyway, that bime gets shortened to bim in other words. So then that's when the morpheme changes, then, like what you were saying here, bimose, those kind of ones as well. So it still remains that directional part. But I've, you know how sometimes in the other preverb is ije, and sometimes you see people use the word gi ije, ijichige. And it seems like to me, I'm like, isn't that like uh, redundant to say gi jichige? But they say that. That's and then gi me jichige, So it's but I've never seen anybody say gi me bematze, gi me bematze. So I never seen that to be a redundant. Talk about a redundant form. But that's the other part thing, and. But of course, you know all these words about not inodzuin, undodzuin, of course, for birth, to those in bemodzuin. So you have all these words about that gibot, and everyone. The funny thing is, everyone learns gibotis when you're a kid. That you get told by elders, and Rex now gibotis or gibotis. They'll say, but they don't make the connection between gibotis and bemodis. They don't make that connection. And to me, that's the part where our actual morphology, if they had an understanding or an awareness, not necessarily an understanding, if they had an awareness of morphology, then they were like, oh, these two have the same ending. I wonder why. But I've never heard any student ever say that Hippotis and Bimodis, Minopmodis. So I don't hear them, wonder about that. And that's the kind of, I guess, downfall of our pedagogy, in a sense, that we don't have that enough, rich enough to get them to look at the morphemes that way and to play around with them. But that's how I got into this too. Was actually years ago, when I was learning, like 30 years ago. It was Basil Johnston's book. Not a book. He had a beginner course outline, and it was called Ojibwe Language Beginner Course Outline for Beginners. Ojibwe, yeah, Beginner Course Outline for Beginners. There, course outline for beginners. So I had that red. It was a red book, and it just had a guy in green, like an outline of a guy in green, and it was what we would call now these days stock phrase methodology of teaching. So you had a number of phrases in the lesson, and if it was about time, then you had all 1 o'clock all the way to 12 o'clock. And then if it was about clan animals, then you had a certain set of clan animals. Then if it was about gardening, so you had the words, the vocabulary, then you had sample sentences, but you didn't actually learn the difference between animate and inanimate, and you just were expected to memorize these phrases and put them in with. So let's say example, one of the zone kamik gijin kazo gima would have been one of them, because he had a unit on chiefs, and there was a chief named Strong Earth. Anyway, so he would say that then all you were expected. Then there was other chiefs' names there, like Kche Ojibwe, Gijin Kaza Gima. So you just went through and you just slotted in the names to that, but you weren't really ever able to say Gijin Kajagaza or Gijin Kanago Gut wa Ogima Kche Gima. You weren't able to modify those. Anyway, the thing that I was at that time, I ended up going to the Spadina branch in Toronto, which is right by the Native Canadian Center. That's where they have the Native collection. And here, what I didn't know at that time was they actually had Basil, all the tapes that went with that. There was like 36 or some crazy amount of tapes. So don't tell his children this. But I went to the library and I took that out. It come in like a book, and each cassette had a slot where you could fit it in. And then I just bought a bunch of blank tapes, and I double recorded them. And in my job at that time, I was driving to different reserves in Lake Ontario watershed. So I was going to Curve Lake, Alderville, Hiawatha, Scugog, and all the way out to Kwasosny. So then I just play those tapes. And then I just get sick of them, of course, and just play some Metallica after or whatever to clear my head. But the thing there that really ended up hooking me was at the end of that book, Basil, he doesn't call it, he just calls it word parts. And he put together all these different morphemes, really, and just started talking about them and pronouncing them. And then he would give the kind of cultural background of why it's called that. And then that was what I found really really interesting, because one of the things that I liked was he would say, Gyose, Gyose, he or she is hunting. He says the reason it's called that is because Gyo means he's going around in a circle. And that's what a hunter does, Gyose. They'll circle, go out and circle and come back. So that's what they call that, Gyose. So I was like, oh, geez, I never knew that. I thought that was pretty cool to learn. And then the other, he says, again, this was about great chiefs and warriors. And he goes, Azion, Azion. He says, but now that's a diaper. That word is a diaper, but that used to be the loincloth. And so you're learning word etymologies, the history of the word, and then also how it changed. But then he was also putting on these other why why that word or phrase is used that way and turned that way. So that was one thing that I really enjoyed, and I started try. I thought, well, how can I make a lesson out of this? But I never really. Uh, I tried to make an app, but we ran out of money on it for that particular thing. But we had some lesson plans in there. Uh, we did do this on that Quizlet, and I had my little cousin who was a good drawer. She a good illustrator. So we did all these things about body parts because we just thought, well, the kids might have fun with this if we made a little cartoon kind of thing out of it. So I had her draw somebody, we put in walk in the care, and then didn't walk a gate, and so then my cousin drew those out, and I thought, okay, this is the way they're gonna learn this. If they can walk a John, can walk in the care, can walk a gate, and then mish gundagane, mish done, mish nike. So then they'll pick up on all these things is what my thinking was, and then we had the illustration go, and then the kids. The other thing was to make you. Big thing then. This was 2011 to 2017. Was to try and get them to actually. We were just trying to use pictures and not writing, and to get them to identify the word from based on what they learned, and using pictures and drills to do that. So anyway, it was a bit, sometimes it got a bit hard because the actual funny thing was the fluent teacher was the one who would end up using the writing. And then I was like, don't use the writing. And then sure enough, I sat in and observed her one time, and she wrote on the back of the card what the answer was in English. And then so the kids are like, what are you looking at? What are you looking at, teacher? So they saw that she was reading it. And I'm like, see, that's why you don't do that. You got to try and make it seem like that's the only way to say that. And anyway, so we tried to use those different morphemes for something that they could relate to. And the thing I wanted to do, we never did do, but my boss at the time, who was the principal, Neil DeBosque, he's the one who more or less headhunted me. He says, we want to try and give this a real good go, and we want to make a curriculum that will be scaffolded, all this. Anyway, then I was like, you know what we should do, Neil? I said, we'll record you, and you'll be just like Grover on Sesame Street. You know, when Grover runs way to the back of the road and says, far, far. Then he comes running close up to the camera and he says, near, near. Then we'll have you do that. Yeah. And you'll run, one thing we could do is say, Bijbato, and you come running to the camera. And then Nimbato, you run away. And then the Kambato, you run across the screen. And then Bimskopto, you run in a circle. And then we put something in the middle of Giutabato, you run around that thing. So, and then Jebato, you run backwards. We said we could just have a bunch of things like that they would do for morpheme, and then they would understand the morphemes of it, was what we were thinking.
Miigwech to Alan for that amazing conversation. Really appreciate him taking the time to talk with us and to share some of that. The discussion of bit and neh really resonated with me because I was in a class once and the teacher wanted to focus on that because he was saying it's something that speakers do a lot that learners don't pick up. So, learners learn about it and they think they have it down because they can tell you what they do and they can recognize it in text, but they just don't use it when they're speaking. And so we had this whole lesson and we went through examples from speakers, like discussions that they were having. And then we had to say something. And so I made up this little story. And even though I was focused on using that bih and nih directional, marker, I still only used it like a quarter of the times that were accessible to me that I could have. And so it really is something that, as a person who grew up speaking English, I don't think to add in because we don't have that in English.
Yeah, I have the same reality, and certainly recognizing, step one, recognizing when it's in stories and speech, and trying to think about the motion and the movement of that action as it's going away towards in process and things like that. I sometimes call it the Anishinaabe space-time continuum, because there's like the idea of space and movement, and it gets a little weird, right? Like some people always look at me when I say this. I'm like, oh, that didn't make sense to people. So if this gets weird for our listeners, just clock it up to Danae being weird. That's okay. But there's the space-time continuum, and the idea of these all of these actions always having motion. And so that's what it helps me to think about, and it adds that feeling of movement to a lot of these actions. And so the examples that Alan was talking about, things coming away, being moved away from the water or towards the water, depending on perspective. Yeah, I'm the same. Like I feel like I can recognize when it's being used properly by a speaker, and then it really makes me think, okay, wait, they're describing this movement, and I have to sort of think about, is that towards us? Is that away from us? Am I involved? Am I there? I don't know. I don't know. Then trying to put it into action is such a good point, that in English we just don't have that movement in our language. We don't talk about as when you're kind of oversimplified, and you walk away from things and you walk toward things, and that's kind of all it is. But it seems so much more, um, I don't know, so much more complete, and more imbued in everything that is said in Anishinaabe, and it is a really interesting idea, and is one of those harder things for us as learners to try to pick up.
Mhm. I also really liked the discussion of Basil Johnston's work. And I think Alan mentioned that he, back in the day, went and got the cassettes from the library. But I wanted to mention to people that actually now you don't have to go and get the cassette, but Basil's family has made available a lot of these recordings through their website, which is winterspiritcreations.com. And we will put a link in the description.
So Alan has 25 years or 30 years of learning up on me, so it does give you something to work for, and just understanding and knowing the lifelong journey, but acknowledging those teachers like Basil, who really committed his life to the language and left so much for us to learn from, and a good reminder. And thank you and acknowledgement to his family for continuing to make his work available, for allowing the learner community to access, and really excited they did a whole bunch of work on their website over the last few years, so they're so much more accessible now. So yeah, shout out to that family, to Basil's family, and definitely go check out the website.
Mhm. And they do have samples of the audio on the website. Yeah, and the other thing that I think is really cool as a person who's learning in the city was, you know, hearing about Alan and his connection to learning in the city, learning where you can and how you can at that time. So I think a good lesson for all of us to not put it off until it's easier. You know, there's a lot more resources now than there were then. But I think we'd all be a lot worse off if Alan had put off his learning journey until it was more convenient. So, all of you out there, do what you can, keep at it. Um, really inspiring to see learners who have that level of proficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. And for both of us that are living in cities, and different cities and different things are happening in our communities, but that there is still always opportunity with the speakers in our community to sit with them and hear their sound, and support the community to grow. So yeah, appreciate all the time with Alan. And this is the first of 4 episodes, as a reminder that where we're going to talk about all kinds of different things, all kinds of different topics, and really excited for this whole series.
So, again, our deep thanks to Alan Corbiere for talking with us. Thanks to all of you for coming to listen today, and we will see you in our next episode with part 2 with Alan Corbiere. This has been Anishinaabe Word Parts, written and produced by Dené and Rochelle.
A big miigwech to all the language teachers who have helped us along our learning journey. We hope we've represented the language well, and apologies to everyone for all the errors we made in this episode.
For every episode, we consult our favorite resources, Anishinaabe Online Dictionary, the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, Gukum's Language, and Anishinaabe Reference Grammar.
For more information about the podcast or resources used in this episode, check out our webpage and social media.
Graphic design by Christy Belcourt. Artwork by Christy Belcourt and Norman Allen. Miigwech!
Miigwech!